Thank you. Thanks for coming. I want to tell you a story about failure. Lots of failure. People like to talk about success. They interview you after you've succeeded. They write books about the eureka moments. But they don't talk about the taste of ash in your mouth. They don't talk about the nights you stare at the ceiling wondering if you've just incinerated $100 million of your own money on an impossible dream. I want to talk about that today. I want to talk about our final gamble, Falcon 1. People see SpaceX now landing rockets on drone ships, launching astronauts to the space station, Starship towering in Texas. It looks inevitable. It wasn't. It almost didn't happen. If there was ever a moment where the entire future, not just of SpaceX, but perhaps the entire future of commercial space was hanging by a single thread, it was in 2008 on a small humid island in the Pacific. Part I had the taste of ash. The place was called Amalek, part of the Kwajalein Atoll. It's beautiful in a way, turquoise water. But for us, it was hell, a tropical hell. Everything you put there corrodes. The salt air, the humidity. It's an unforgiving environment. And in August 2008, we had just failed our third launch. First failure, March 2006, exploded right after leaving the pad. Second failure, March 2007. Got higher, but still failed. Pogo oscillation tore it apart. And now the third time, the rocket flew perfectly. Our new Merlin 1C engine worked perfectly. And then at stage separation, the first stage crashed back into the second stage, collision. The entire mission lost. 3 launches, 3 failures. So you have to understand the financial context. I had taken the money I made from PayPal, about $100 million, and I'd bet it all on SpaceX. I had also bet on Tesla. And by 2008, both companies were on the verge of bankruptcy. Tesla was in its first production hell, and SpaceX was burning cash at a horrifying rate. We weren't just about to run out of money. We were out of money. After the third failure, we had just enough money for one more try. One. There would be no Flight 5 if Flight 4 failed. If this next launch failed, SpaceX was over, Tesla would likely be over too, and I would be personally bankrupt. This is pressure. Imagine trying to do something that powerful nations have struggled to do, reach orbit, and you're doing it with a small team on a tropical island with your very last rocket, and the money in the bank is evaporating by the day. Part 2, the lesson of the $10 nut and the Pogo monster. So why did we keep failing? Were we stupid? Were we the amateurs everyone said we were? No. We were learning. We were paying tuition to Mother Nature. And Mother Nature is a harsh teacher. The important thing about failure isn't that you fail, it's why you fail. And whether you learn anything, do you have a feedback loop? Are you closing that loop? Let's dissect the first 3 failures, because they tell a story. They tell the story of the evolution of failure from simple mistakes to complex problems, and finally to the subtle consequences of innovation. Failure 1, the nut first flight. We were so excited.
We're there on Amalek, the rocket leaves the pad, and 25 seconds later, the engine caught fire. The rocket falls back and explodes. The cause? An aluminum B-nut.
A tiny component worth maybe a few dollars on a fuel line. Here's the problem. We were on Amalek, salt air. That aluminum nut, even though it was anodized, had corroded. It had failed from stress corrosion cracking. When the engine fired up and the fuel pressure rose, the RP1 fuel leaked through the crack, sprayed onto the hot engine, and boom. The entire $20 million mission destroyed by a corroded nut. Gwyn, our employee number 7, and now our president, an extraordinary person, had to go on NPR and try to explain this. They called it a procedural problem. She was right. The procedural problem was using aluminum in a salty marine environment without proper inspection. It was a fundamental material science mistake. Lesson reality just slapped us in the face. Don't use aluminum nuts there. We swapped them for stainless steel. Problem solved. This was a stupid failure, a rookie mistake. We ignored the fundamentals of environment versus materials, we would never make that mistake again. Failure 2, the Pogo monster, 1 year later. We're back on omelette. Stainless steel nuts, no leaks. The rocket launches, it flies past T plus 30 seconds. The control room holds its breath. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. Everything's perfect. We're past max Q. And then the rocket started to oscillate violently, up and down, like a pogo stick. This phenomenon is called pogo oscillation. It's a monster in rocketry. NASA struggled with it in the Gemini program. It's a self-excited vibration loop. It works like this. The engine creates a small vibration, that vibration travels up the rocket structure, is greater than it makes the fuel in the pipes vibrate, is greater than that fuel vibration changes the pressure and flow rate into the engine, is greater than that makes the engine's thrust change, is greater than that creates a bigger vibration. Rinse, repeat, very fast. The frequency of the pogo oscillation happened to match the rocket's natural resonant frequency, and it tore itself apart. The rocket lost control, and we had to terminate it. This wasn't a stupid failure. This was a complex failure. This was a high-level dynamic physics problem. We got killed by a monster we knew existed, but we hadn't modeled correctly. Lesson, ground simulation is not reality. Only flight is flight. We went back, added dampers, basically shock absorbers, to the fuel system. Pogo, problem solved. Our enemies were getting smarter. Failure 3, the pain of progress. This one hurt the most. We hadn't just fixed Pogo. We had improved the rocket. We had introduced the new Merlin 1C engine. This was a breakthrough. The old engine was ablatively cooled. It basically burned off part of its own nozzle to stay cool. It was inefficient in single use. The new Merlin 1C was regeneratively cooled. We pumped the super cold RP1 fuel through tiny channels in the nozzle wall before burning it. This cooled the nozzle and preheated the fuel, boosting efficiency. This is the technology that makes the Falcon 9 possible. We were so proud of it. Flight 3 lifts off. Perfect. The Merlin 1C engine performs like a champion. It flies right through the pogo point. No problem. It gets to 35 kilometers altitude. Beautiful. It was time for stage separation. The command is sent to shut down the first stage engine. All good. But 1.5 seconds later, the explosive bolts fire to separate the second stage. And the outside world, they were laughing at us. The entire traditional aerospace industry, the cost-plus contractors, the big corporations, they hated us. They called our approach stupid. They said we were amateurs. They said we didn't know what we were doing. Journalists wrote gleeful articles about Musk's latest failure. NASA at the time wouldn't take our calls. They thought we were a joke. The pressure on the team was unbelievable. These people had left stable, high-paying jobs at Boeing or Lockheed to join this crazy dream. They were working 80, 100, even 120 hours a week. They were sleeping out of their desks. They had poured their blood and sweat, literally, into those rockets, and they had just watched their third one blow up. Imagine you're one of those engineers. You're in Amalek. You're exhausted. You're homesick. And you just saw your work turn into a fireball, and your boss me just told you we have one shot left. The morale was shattered. Right after the disastrous failure of Flight 3, I sent an email to the whole company. I knew I had to do something. I had to hold their spurs together. I had to be a psychological shock absorber for the team. In that email in August 2008, I wrote this. It was obviously a big disappointment not to reach orbit on this flight. However, SpaceX will not miss a beat in execution. And then I wrote the most important part. There should be absolutely zero question that SpaceX will prevail in reaching orbit and demonstrating reliable space transport. For my part, I will never give up, and I mean never. Some people might read that and think I was delusional. Never give up? Dude, you're broke. But it wasn't blind optimism. It was an act of psychological engineering. Right before Flight 3, knowing it might fail, we had taken in one last small investment, one final tranche of money to keep the lights on. It was from people like Peter Thiel. That was all we had. My never give up declaration served two purposes. First, it was to reassure the devastated team.
to tell them I was still in, I was still fighting, and they should be too. Second, it was a signal to our last investors, to our potential customers, and to NASA that my persistence was not contingent on a single failure. It was an irrevocable commitment. It said, I am going to see this through no matter what. We were betting the entire company on Flight 4. And that's why, in our culture, failure is not an option. Well, but there was a problem. The new 1C engine, because it was regeneratively cooled, had a bit of residual thrust. After shutdown, there was still a little bit of expanding fuel sputtering out of the nozzle. The old 1A engine didn't have this. It shut off instantly. The 1.5-second delay was enough for the 1A engine, but it wasn't enough for the 1C. What happened was the second stage separated, but the first stage still sputtering a bit and accelerated and bumped right back into the second stage it had just released. We were beaten by our own innovation. A second-order, unforeseen consequence of making the engine better. This was a subtle failure. What made it worse? We couldn't have detected this on the ground. Why? Because, as we reported later, when we tested at sea level, we had higher ambient pressure, so this effect was masked. In the vacuum of space, that little bit of residual thrust was enough. On the ground, the air pressure squelched it. Once again, only flight is flight. Tom Muller, our engine genius, and I looked at the data. He was devastated. The whole team was. But the data was clear. The solution, it was almost a joke. All we had to do was wait longer. Just increase the time delay between engine shutdown and stage separation. Give it one more second to vent, just 1 second. 3 failures, hundreds of millions of dollars, all because of a nut, an oscillation, and a second. I had a table made of this for the team. It looked like this. Reality's feedback loop, the first 3 Falcon 1 failures. This was our tuition. We paid it in money, sweat, and fireballs. And now we had one final exam, part 3, breaking reality, first principles thinking. Why? Why were we putting ourselves through all this? Why build our own rocket in the first place? Why not just buy one? This is the core question. And the answer explains everything about SpaceX. In 2002, after PayPal, I was thinking about what was next. I thought about the future I wanted to see. I want us to be a multi-planetary species, a spacefaring civilization. And that means we have to get to Mars. So I had this idea of Mars Oasis. Send a small automated greenhouse to Mars. Pictures of green plants on red soil. It would be an iconic image. It would get people excited about space. So I went to buy a rocket. I went to Russia. I talked to them about buying a refurbished ICBM. They looked at me like I was insane. This internet guy wants to buy a nuclear missile, but the real problem was the price. Even if I could buy one, the price was astronomical. I looked in the US, the aerospace manufacturers, they said, sure, Elon, $65 million, please. $65 million for a one-way trip. Something was wrong. Something was wrong with the math. And this is where I applied the mental framework I've used for everything. It's called first principles thinking. Most people, especially in old industries, reason by analogy. They do things a certain way because that's how it's always been done. We charge $X for a rocket because Boeing Lockheed's rocket costs $X. It's intellectual laziness. First principles thinking is a physics-based approach. You ignore all human conventions and assumptions, and you boil everything down to its most fundamental truths, the physical atoms you can't argue with anymore. And then you build back up from there. So I asked the first principles question, what is a rocket made of? The answer wasn't magic. The answer was aerospace-grade aluminum alloys plus some titanium, copper, and carbon fiber. Next question, what is the value of those materials on the commodity market? I did the math, and the answer shocked me. It turned out that the raw materials cost of a rocket was only about 2% of the typical sale price. 2%. That meant 98% of the cost of a rocket
was the cost of inefficiency. It was the cost of multi-layered subcontractors, each adding their profit margin. It was the cost of Byzantine bureaucracies. It was the cost of government cost-plus contracts, where there is zero incentive to be efficient. It was the cost of reasoning by analogy. When I saw that 2% number, I knew we had a chance. I decided, okay, we're not going to buy a rocket. We're going to start a company. We're going to buy the raw materials for cheap, and we're going to build the rocket ourselves. That's why SpaceX was born, not to be just another rocket company, but to see if we could break the cost equation by going back to the physics. Now, let's go back to our 3 failures. Here's what people don't get. Those 3 failures, WERE, the tuition fee for first principles. The 98% that other companies charge isn't profit. It's their insurance cost to avoid failure. They do it by using heritage parts, things that have flown hundreds of times, are proven reliable, and are absurdly expensive. They are paying to not innovate. By going back to first principles, we chose to throw out the heritage rulebook, but that meant we had to rediscover why those rules existed in the first place on our own. Failure 1 was our tuition for relearning the first principles of material science in a marine environment. Failure 2 was our tuition for relearning the first principles of structural and fluid dynamics. Failure 3 was our tuition for relearning the first principles of fluid dynamics in a vacuum. We weren't just trying to build a cheaper rocket. We were trying to find the true physical cost of getting to orbit. Those 3 failures were the price Mother Nature demanded for that crash course. To do this, you need a special kind of team. You can't just hire people used to reasoning by analogy. You need engineers who are physicists at heart. That's why one of my first calls was to Tom Mueller. Tom was a legend in the amateur rocketry scene. He was building liquid fuel engines in his garage. He was one of the best engine designers in the world, but he was languishing inside a big aerospace corporation. I found Tom and said, come work with me. We're going to build engines from scratch. I remember convincing Tom of a crazy idea for the Merlin engine. It's called face shut-off. Traditional engines have tons of complex valves to stop the flow of fuel and oxidizer, lots of moving parts, lots of failure points. I asked, why don't we get rid of the valves? Why don't we just slam the injectors into each other to cut off the flow? Tom told me it was insane. He said, Elon, this is going to massively increase the R&D complexity. We are going to blow up a lot of hardware on the test stand to make this work. And I said, great, let's do it. We did blow up a lot of hardware, but in the end, we ended up with an engine that was physically simpler, more reliable, and cheaper to build. We accepted the R&D pain up front in exchange for the first principles elegance on the back end. That's SpaceX. That's what we were doing on Amalek. We were paying the price for that philosophy. In Fireballs, hell is people, physics is one thing, first principles is a framework, but they don't make a rocket fly. People make rockets fly. A company is not a building or a balance sheet or a name. It's a group of people gathered for a common purpose. And the early SpaceX team, they were the best. They weren't just working for a paycheck. They were true believers. They believed in the mission. They had to be, because the work was brutal. I'm famously demanding extreme work schedules, 80 to 100 hours a week, constant pressure. You can't pay people to endure that. They have to do it voluntarily. They do it because they believe they are working on something more important than themselves. They believe in the goal. Gwen Shotwell, she was employee number 7. She had to go sell flights to customers. Can you imagine that conversation? Hi, Mr. Customer. Would you like to put your $50 million satellite on our rocket? The rocket that just blew up twice, Gwen. That's the one. But we fixed it. She did it. She kept customer faith alive. She handled the nasty interviews where reporters basically called us liars. She was a warrior. But there's one story that I think it captures everything about SpaceX. It captures our culture. It happened between Failure 3 and Flight 4. It's the story of Zach Dunn. The scene, August 2008. We just lost Flight 3. We're broke. We have one and only one rocket left on Earth. That's the Flight 4 hardware. We had to ship this last rocket from our headquarters in Hawthorne, California, to our launch site on Amalek. The first step was to get it on a C-17 Air Force cargo plane to Hawaii. From there, a barge would take it the rest of the way. About 20 of our engineers were on the C-17 with the rocket. Zach Dunn was one of them. He was young. I think he was just an intern or a junior engineer, 2 years with the company. The C-17 is on its way to Hawaii. As it starts to descend for landing, something happens. The air pressure inside the cargo bay starts to rise as the plane drops. But the pressure inside the rocket's liquid oxygen tank doesn't. It's designed for vacuum, not for a descending airplane. And the team hears a loud, terrible groaning sound. It was the sound of the aluminum LOX tank starting to buckle. The pressure differential was crushing it like an empty beer can. If the tank breached, it could cause a catastrophic explosion instantly. They call the pilot. Increase altitude now. The pilot pulls the plane up to lower the pressure. But he gets on the radio and says, guys, I only have enough fuel to circle one more time. You have 10 minutes to fix that thing or we are landing, whether it blows up or not. 10 minutes. The pressure is building again. Ann Chenery, the launch operations manager, gave an order. She's smart. She said, everyone, move to the front of the plane. Get away from the rocket. If it goes, we need to be at the front. It was a rational order. It's what any sane person would do. Cut your losses, save yourself. But Zach Dunn didn't do that. He did the opposite. While everyone else was moving forward, Zach, a 20-something-year-old intern, ran toward the rocket. He grabbed a wrench. He knew the rocket inside and out. He knew there was a vent port. He climbed inside the rocket structure right next to the groaning, buckling LOX tank that could detonate at any second. He found the vent port, put a wrench on it, and opened it. You hear a loud whoosh as the outside air rushes in, equalizing the pressure. The groaning stopped. Zach Dunn saved our last rocket. He saved the company. And the incident damaged part of the rocket, but we were able to repair it in Hawaii. That story, that is SpaceX. Think about it. It's a perfect metaphor for everything. The last rocket was our financial state. The terrible noise was our unforeseen failures. 10 minutes of fuel was the timeline we had left until bankruptcy. The order to move forward was the rational old world advice. Give up, save yourself, accept failure. And Zach Dunn climbing inside with a wrench, that's first principles. That's an empowered individual owning the problem, interfacing directly with the physics, ignoring massive personal risk because he believed in the mission. He wasn't an intern, he was a SpaceX engineer. Our culture isn't about titles, it's about responsibility. You own your problem, you solve it. People talk a lot about the production hell we went through with the Model 3. They interviewed me on 60 Minutes about it. I said it was painful. I was sleeping on the factory floor. R&D hell. The human feedback loop Falcon 1 was hell too. Not just any kind of hell, it was R&D hell. People sometimes romanticize those early days like it was all inspiration and big dreams. But no, it was chaos. It was frustration. It was endless nights in a tropical warehouse full of mosquitoes, broken parts, and laptops running hot from debugging engines that wouldn't start. We weren't geniuses sitting in fancy labs. We were exhausted human beings trying to make something fly when everything in nature was trying to make it fall. At the same time, over in California, Tesla was also in hell, production hell. It's funny now, looking back, because they were both the same story playing out in different forms. At SpaceX, rockets were blowing up. At Tesla, assembly lines were breaking down. And at the center of both, I was just trying to keep them alive. Me sleeping on the factory floor at Tesla, covered in dust, eating cold pizza for breakfast, and Zach Dunn literally climbing inside a rocket that had just exploded to figure out what went wrong. Those two things are the same act. They both come from the same mindset. A refusal to accept distance between you and the problem, a refusal to accept failure as someone else's issue, a refusal to say, let's schedule a meeting to discuss it. No, you go there, you touch it, you put your physical body at the problem until it yields. That's what it means to close the feedback loop to zero. no email threads, no PowerPoints, no layers of management standing between the problem and the person who can fix it. Just you, your hands, your brain, your grid-facing physics directly. That's the real work. That's what moves rockets. That's what makes electric cars real. You can't do it from a chair. You can't do it from a Zoom call. You do it by being there. You weld, you code, you test, you fail, you rebuild. You go through hell and you keep going. And that's the team that got us to Flight 4. A team of Zach Duns, people who didn't wait for permission, people who didn't care about titles, people who looked at an exploding rocket and said, okay, what's next? That's the kind of mindset that saves companies. That's the kind of mindset that makes history. Because if you can close the feedback loop fast enough, if you can remove every delay between reality and response, you create unstoppable momentum. That's how we made it to Flight 4. The final gamble, September 2008. We're back on Amalek. The pressure was absolute. Everything. Everything depended on this query. This wasn't a simulation. This wasn't a drill. If we failed, the doors would be locked, the lights would go out. SpaceX would be a footnote in aerospace history. Those kids tried. It was cute. The team had repaired Zach's damaged rocket. They had rechecked everything. Every nut, every wire, every line of code. We had done the failure analysis from Flight 3. We had figured it out. The solution, as I said, was painfully simple. Increase the time delay between first stage engine shutdown and stage separation. Give it more time to vent its residual thrust. 1 second was all we needed. The 28th of September 2008. We're in the control room. You could feel the tension. Nobody was talking. The countdown, 10, 9, 8. I've always hated countdowns. They're so slow. 3, 2, 1, 0, liftoff. The rocket left the pad. It looked beautiful. Every eye was glued to the data. Altitude, velocity, plus 30 seconds. Where Flight 1 died, we passed it. Plus 2 minutes. Where Flight 2 died, we passed it. Now the moment of truth. Almost 3 minutes into flight. Main engine cutoff. Silence. Waiting for stage separation. It was the longest moment of my life. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. We're waiting for the first stage to fall away. We're waiting for there not to be a collision. And then stage separation successful. A collective gasp in the control room, but it wasn't over. The second stage had to light. Second stage kestrel ignition. Yes, it worked. The second stage burned for several minutes. It took us further than we had ever been, and finally achieved orbit. The room erupted. People were screaming. People were crying. People were hugging. I can't describe the feeling. It wasn't joy. Joy is too small a word. It was relief, a release from gravity, both literally and metaphorically. We had done it. September 28, 2008. For the first time in history, a private company using a liquid-fueled rocket had reached Earth orbit. We had done it. We were alive. A few weeks later, Christmas came early. The phone rang. It was NASA. They had been watching. They had seen Flight 3 fail. And they had seen us analyze, fix, and succeed with Flight 4 all in a matter of weeks. They had seen our persistence. They had seen our engineering. And they awarded us the Commercial Resupply Services contract. They bet on us to resupply the International Space Station. That contract was worth $1.6 billion. People say Flight 4 won us the $1.6 billion contract query. That's true, but it's deeper than that. That contract wasn't a bailout. It wasn't a prize. It was a consequence. Think about this. NASA was in a gamble of their own. Their COTS program was a bet that private, nimble companies could replace the retired space shuttle and take over low Earth orbit. The entire old guard industry was telling NASA they were crazy. Private companies can't do this. If Flight 4 had failed, it wasn't just SpaceX that would have gone bankrupt. The entire idea of American commercial space might have died with it. NASA would have been forced to go back to the traditional expensive, slow, cost-plus contractors. When Falcon 1 reached orbit, we didn't just save ourselves, we validated NASA's gamble. We proved that the first principles model worked. We proved that a small team of dedicated engineers could do what only superpowers had done before at a tiny fraction of the cost. The $1.6 billion contract was NASA's recognition that the future had arrived, and it saved the company. It funded the development of Falcon 9 and Dragon, and it was all because we didn't give up after 3 failures. The philosophy of failure, the lesson, the real meaning of failure. What's the lesson here? The obvious one, the textbook answer, is the one you'll see in business schools and motivational posters. Perseverance in the face of repeated failure is the key to achieving major breakthroughs. And sure, that's true. Persistence matters. Persistence is very important. You can't give up. You have to keep going when it hurts. You have to push through the fear, the doubt, the sleepless nights. But I think it's deeper than that, because persistence by itself is a weak word. It makes it sound like all you're doing is banging your head against the wall until the wall finally cracks. But that's not how progress happens. That's not what we did. We didn't just keep failing the same way, hoping for a miracle. We iterated, we learned, we evolved. Every failure contained a signal, and our job was to find it. We studied every explosion, every burned wire, every sensor glitch. We found the physics behind each failure. We learned how to make the system smarter. We learned how to make ourselves smarter. That's the key difference. True persistence isn't repetition, it's adaptation. It's listening to what reality is trying to tell you, even when it's painful. See, I have this philosophy about failure, and I say it all the time, to the horror of investors, to the shock of people who don't understand how progress actually works. Failure is an option here. People misunderstand that line completely. They think it means we don't care about results. They think it means we're careless or reckless. They couldn't be more wrong. What it really means is this: if failure is not an option, then innovation isn't either. Because when you remove the possibility of failure, you also remove the possibility of discovery. You create a culture where everyone plays it safe, where no one takes real risks, where progress crawls instead of leaps, and that's not how we move forward. That's not how you reach orbit. That's not how you build rockets that land themselves. Failure is a teacher. It's brutal, it's unforgiving, and it's expensive, but it's also the most honest feedback you'll ever get. Because the laws of physics don't care about your ego. They don't care about your narrative, your PowerPoint, your press release. They just tell you the truth. Every explosion, every lost launch, every sleepless night, those are lessons written in fire. You read them, you study them, and you build again. That's what iteration means. That's how you climb the mountain of impossibility. So when I say failure is an option here, what I really mean is learning is mandatory. Every time we failed, we got closer. Every time we lost, we found something real. And every lesson, every mistake built the foundation for the next success. The goal isn't to avoid failure. The goal is to fail smarter, to fail forward, to compress the feedback loop so tightly that every setback becomes fuel. That's how SpaceX survived. That's how Tesla survived. That's how anything truly great ever gets built. Because the only real failure is the one you don't learn from. It means the exact opposite. Think about the old industry. Think about post-Apollo NASA. They had a silly notion that failure is not an option. What happens when failure is not an option? You become risk-averse. You stop innovating. You only use 30-year-old heritage parts. You add endless layers of bureaucracy to make sure no one can be blamed if something goes wrong. You become slow. You become expensive. You become that 98% of the cost. The failure is not an option. Culture is what killed innovation in aerospace for decades. When I say failure is an option, what I'm really saying is if things are not failing, you're not innovating enough. It's an equation. Think about it. Failure is an R&D methodology. It's data. It's your feedback loop. If you are developing a new product, whether it's a rocket, a car, or software, and you have 0 failures, what does that mean? It means you're doing something too easy. You're treading a well-worn path. You are not pushing the envelope. Your failure rate should be commensurate with your desired rate of innovation. We wanted to innovate extremely rapidly. We wanted to change the entire aerospace paradigm. Therefore, we had to accept a high rate of failure early on. Falcon 1 was a program designed to fail fast and learn fast.
We happily paid the price of 3 failures in exchange for a platform Falcon 9 and an engine Merlin that would change the world. And look now, we blow up starships regularly.
People again say Musk is failing. No, we are learning, we are iterating, we are accelerating that learning. Failure is an option. But, and this is the important part, giving up is not. This leads me to the second philosophy. People always ask me about risk. How could you take that risk? Weren't you afraid of failure? They're doing the math wrong. They're calculating odds. I don't calculate odds. I calculate importance. When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. The odds of Falcon 1 were terrible. The odds of Tesla were terrible. The odds of landing a rocket on a ship in the middle of the ocean, almost zero. If I went by the odds, I never would have started. But it's not about the odds. It's about the importance. Is the goal important enough? Is breaking the grip of the old aerospace industry important? Yes. Is creating a sustainable transport future for Earth important? Yes. And there's a more important question, the biggest question, part 7, the light of consciousness, the final why. Why do all this? Why go through the Falcon 1 gamble? Why risk personal bankruptcy? Why sleep on factory floors and work 120-hour weeks? It's not for money. I had plenty of money after PayPal. It's not for fame. Frankly, it's a nuisance most of the time. It's not for a NASA contract. It's for something I call the light of consciousness. Pull back. Look at the big picture, the really big picture. The universe is 13.8 billion years old. Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Life, maybe 3.5 billion years. For almost all of that time, the universe was dark, silent. There was nothing there to be aware of itself. And then on this tiny, wet planet, for a brief flicker of cosmic time, something happened. Complex life evolved. And then consciousness, us. We are the universe aware of itself. We are the means by which the cosmos can wonder about itself. Human consciousness, it's a small, flickering candle in the vast, endless darkness of the universe. It is incredibly rare, it is incredibly precious, and it is incredibly fragile. I think we have a duty to maintain the light of consciousness, to make sure it continues into the future.
Throughout history, civilizations have risen and fallen. Egypt, Rome, the Maya. History is a graveyard of cultures that thought they would last forever. We are no different.
We face existential threats, nuclear war, engineered pandemics, catastrophic climate change, an unfriendly AI, or just a random event, a big asteroid, a supervolcano. The truth is, conscious life exists on only one planet, one pale blue dot. That makes us a single point of failure species. This is not an abstract philosophy. This is an engineering risk assessment. Having a single point of failure is a terrible design. The window for us to act, the window where we have advanced technology but haven't yet destroyed ourselves, may not be open forever. History suggests it can close. So what's the goal? The goal must be to make life multiplanetary. As fast as possible, we have to create a backup. We have to establish a self-sustaining city on another planet. Mars is the best candidate. As Gwyn said, Mars is a fixer-upper planet. Absolutely. It'll be incredibly hard, but it's a backup. And that is why I do what I do. And this is how it all connects. The final gamble with Falcon 1 wasn't just about saving SpaceX. It wasn't even just about proving first principles. It was about keeping that flame alive. Look at the logic chain. We must preserve the light of consciousness. To do that, we must become multiplanetary. To become multiplanetary, we need a fully, rapidly reusable, extremely low-cost transport. To fund Starship, we need a profitable, reusable-based space company. To build Falcon 9, we needed money and experience. NASA's $1 6B contract provided the money. To get that contract, we had to prove we could reach orbit. And to do that, we had to succeed with Flight 4 of Falcon 1. You see, everything depended on that one last gamble. Falcon 1 wasn't the goal, it was the opening battle. It was the gamble to enable the bigger gamble. It was the test of whether human will, powered by first principles, could bend physics to its demands. When we were on the brink of failure on Amalek with our last rocket, we weren't just fighting for our company, we were fighting to keep that window open. The window to a multiplanetary future, the window to preserve that small, precious candle. So when you face your own failure, and you will, I want you to ask yourself this question. Not, what are my odds? But, is this important enough? Because if the answer is yes, you will find a way. You will climb inside the rocket with a wrench. You will endure the taste of ash. And you will never, ever give up. Thank you.